It was like Ignorance is Bliss, On a Wire with Get Up Kids, In Reverie by Saves the Day. There's those records where it's just like, okay, I know what's coming.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, did you know the opening song is a song that I wrote years ago with my band Arcade Academy called Diner Parking Lots? There's a link in the bio if you want to go to SoundCloud and check it out. You can also check out the other stuff I put out on Bandcamp. It's arcadeacademyrock.bandcamp.com, and you can listen to some tunes there. Vagrant Records is an American record label that was founded in 1995 by Rich Egan and John Cohen. It is home to such artists as Dashboard Confessional, Saves the Day, The Get Up Kids, Census Fail, Alkaline Trio, Boxer, Emmanuel, and a ton of others that you know and love. This is a record label that came out of nowhere and released these bangers of albums by these bands that I still love to this day. They were such a huge part of my history, and I know a lot of you listening, this was a huge impact on your history as well. So the fact that I got Rich on this podcast is fucking awesome. And I asked him if he wanted to be on the podcast, and he said, sure, man, would love to do your pod. So I got him on the Skype after 30 minutes of technical difficulties, and this is what we talk about. What was the first Vagrant release? How we started managing Face-to-Face? Signing the Get Up Kids? The massive Vagrant tour? The roadie leaving merch money in NYC story? What were the best years of Vagrant? Emmanuel's record leaking? The Vagrant podcast? His thoughts on Saves the Day on Conan O'Brien? Ignorance is Bliss leading to a shit-ass tour, Amy Madden and the Dashboard story, and a ton more. I basically just want to jump into this one, so feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. Can you clarify the actual order of first releases before Boxer? Just because I keep saying it, and people are like, oh, Boxer was the first one, and then someone's like, oh, it's this vinyl compilation thing.
Well, yeah, it's understandable because Boxer is the first band that we ever put out. It was the first band that we ever signed, but the first release was a 7-inch box set called West by North South, and it was a bunch of West Coast punk rock bands doing split 7-inches, and so it had Seaweed and J Church and Face to Face and Down by Law and Fluff, Tree People, and a lot of just great West Coast bands from that era. That was our very first release. After that, we put out a couple of put out 2 or 3 7-inches. One of them was a J Church 7-inch. And then we put out the first full length that we put out was the Face to Face live record.
That was before Boxer.
That was before, yeah, because I was managing Face to Face. Somehow we got A&M Records, who was their label, to let us put out their live record because they didn't think a punk rock live record was going to sell, and we ended up selling 100,000 of them. Jesus. So that basically funded the label. And then we put out, after that, we put out Before You Were Punk compilation, and that did just massive. We sold 75,000 of those, and then we put out Boxer. So once we had some money to be able to sign a band, we signed Boxer.
Okay, that makes way more sense because when I was talking to Dave, he said that they came out to see you guys at your office, and I was like, how do they have an office with your first release? But that makes complete sense.
And it was also my management office, so I had Face to Face and a couple other bands, so we already had like a running business out of that office, and Vagrant just we took the office. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was no great shakes. It was above a homeless shelter. It was actually hilarious because it was an abandoned office except for the one room that we rented. And then until we realized and this was back in the dial-up modem days, so we all had to be plugged into like the same phone line. So when the phone would ring, it would sign everybody off the internet. So what we did one day, I don't know how we realized it. We realized, once the online porn guys from down the hall moved out, there was no more tenants in the building except us. And we realized that the same key opened everybody's offices. So then we just expanded into those offices, and that became Vagrant headquarters because we never had a landlord that ever showed up.
Did you ever get caught for that?
What's that?
Did you ever get caught for that?
No, they didn't care. I mean, it was a VFW hall. It was owned by the Knights of Columbus, and it was just this floor of offices above, like, yeah, literally above like a homeless, like a soup kitchen. They never came up there, and we kept the place clean. And yeah, that's how we expand. That's how we expanded. And we just realized one key opened all the doors.
Is that the photo that Dave sent me that's on the Instagram that I tagged you in? You're flipping them off?
That is one of the offices. That's in one of the offices that we commandeered. Yes.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice there's this face-to-face poster behind you too, in that pond.
Yeah, pond. I mean, I don't have the picture in front of me, but there was definitely, yeah, there definitely would have been the face-to-face. I think that probably would have been the face-to-face live poster. But yeah, pond and face-to-face were my two management clients at heart when I started it.
So let's work back up to that, because people really love to hear how people that I talked to got involved in the scene. I actually did a poll on my Instagram. I was like, should I keep asking this question? And it was like overwhelming, like, yeah, because they find this cool connection with that. So we're going to jump back there, and then we're going to just roll into like how you got involved in doing the management and the label and all that stuff, and kind of talk about some cool stories. Especially want to talk about that Vagrant tour that's like fucking infamous that everyone talks about to this day. So how did you personally get involved in the scene?
So I got involved in punk rock because I grew up in Santa Monica, and Santa Monica, if you were into skateboarding and surfing, that's what you did. You listened to punk rock. So I grew up skateboarding and surfing, and so it was just always around me. I had older sisters, one in particular who was very into the scene at the time, the early LA or Black Flag, Descendants, Social Distortion, Circle Jerks. I grew up with all those bands because, one, because of skateboarding and surfing, and two, because my older sister was into them. That's how I first discovered punk rock.
When you started going to shows and stuff, like how did you kind of just like stumble into being the business side of the scene, or did you go to shows and think, I want to do the business side of this thing?
I never went to shows and said, "Oh, this is going to be a career move for me." It was there was no such thought ever crossed, I think, any of our minds back then. It was try to not get beat up by the older kids because I was a lot younger. My friends and I were a lot younger than the scene that was at that time. This was like ninth grade. So this was 1984, 83, 84, which was kind of at the tail end of when LA was really like on fire with those bands, and the scene was just starting to get violent, and like the bands were either breaking up or making weird records, or I think I got in on the last year of it being like good. But yeah, no, we never thought of it as any kind of business. I never thought of it as any kind of business thing. And then in high school, the scene had kind of disintegrated. I got into, because it was literally in my backyard. Like, we would see shows every single weekend. There were unbelievable shows. Whether it was like I said, Black Flag played pretty much every night somewhere. Same with the Minutemen. Same with Social Distortion. All those bands we got to see all the time. And then it all kind of went away. And then in high school, like, alternative music was starting to be a thing. So it was more like the Smiths and the Cure and that kind of scene, which was Jesus and Mary Chain. I loved. I got a soft spot for Jesus and Mary Chain and the Cure. But yeah, there really wasn't a punk rock scene. And then, so at that point, I discovered the Midwest, and I fell in love with the Replacements. And same time, I had been, the only constant really was, the constant was always, I kept listening to the bands from, when I was 13, 14. Social D is still one of my favorite bands, so are the Descendants. But that whole time I was listening to The Clash, and I was listening to the bands from the SST world. And then I discovered like what was going on in Minneapolis, like early Soul Asylum and Husker Du. But mainly the Replacements. And the Replacements, I just became like obsessed with the Replacements.
Why? What was it about them?
The songwriting. I thought there was something about Westerberg that, what was it? Really, he writes in a very traditional. I honestly think he's one of the top 5 best American songwriters ever. For me, he's up there with Brian Wilson and Bob Dylan and the rest, you know. But for him, I mean, for me, I identified with kind of the lovable loser, but kind of with the heart of gold kind of thing. His lyrics were different. His lyrics set him apart. A little bit like why I love the Descendants, because the Descendants, they were nerds. They wrote songs about girls. And Westerberg, as much as they had their kind of like obnoxious punk rock noise songs, I didn't actually even really get into their first couple records. Sorry Ma and Stink, I thought they were just kind of generic, just noisy punk rock records. But then with Hootenanny, and then certainly into Let It Be, and then Tim became like one of my favorite albums of all time. He really started to come into his own as a songwriter, and it was the lyrics that just killed me, because he was so blatantly honest, even in his kind of self-effacing kind of way. He would really, a lot was being exposed in what he was singing about. And it was kind of an early precursor, I guess you could say, to a lot of what I would go on to sign to my label.
I was just gonna say that because I don't want to jump ahead too far, but I want to like dip into it. But because as soon as you're saying that, I'm thinking of, because I really want to talk about that one summer or whatever it was when you signed Saves the Day, Alkaline Trio, Get Up Kids,
Dashboard,
and then Face to Face, or is that they just on the tour?
Oh, Face to Face. I did sign Face to Face.
That was after like Ignorance is Bliss.
Yeah, that was a longer story because I had been managing them since '95. So it was it was different. It was a different. 2002, they finally signed officially to Vagrant, even though we'd put out like their vinyl, their live record, their EP, but they were never officially on the label until 2002.
Because I'm thinking about the other bands beside that we just mentioned earlier, like they all seem to fall in that category about what you just described of why you love the Replacements.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, honestly, it's if you just take two of my three favorite bands of all time are Jawbreaker and the Replacements, and that's really all you got to look at and go, well, duh, that's how Vagrant. That's why I signed who I signed.
It makes total sense. I mean, just even looking through the Wikipedia, I didn't even realize like how many bands that are from back then that I was like, holy shit, I didn't believe like Appleseed. These are bands I love, like Appleseed Cast, and like who else? Like Thrice I got into later on. You got International Noise Conspiracy. You have so many fucking bands in this label. This is so crazy. Emmanuel, I talked to Matt from Emmanuel about
I heard that interview. That was great. I hadn't heard from those guys in forever, and I was stoked that you did that. I mean, man, you did Emmanuel and Boxer, who to this day, to me, are two of the best records we put out. Was both of their debuts, and that just they never went anywhere. But I thought they were brilliant records, and I thought that they were criminally ignored, both of them. So I was so stoked that you did both of those bands. I was like, oh yes. Like it was just awesome. I was very, very stoked.
Oh, that's cool, man. Yeah, the Boxer thing, I was looking for him forever because I was like, what happened to this fucking band? And Emmanuel, my old band, we used to play shows with those guys, and they're Emmanuel Nice. So it was like, I remember just them being little kids, and then I was like, that new record. I was like, I don't know. They're like the little kids, and I heard it. I was like, how did you guys make this sound? It's fucking incredible. It was such a great record.
Yeah, I thought that thing was gonna. I thought it was gonna blow up. I thought it was such an incredible record. Yeah, some of them that should do, and some of them that shouldn't do also, or some you know what I mean. The ones that should don't, and vice versa. But that one, both of those records, I just absolutely love those records. The Boxer record in particular is funny because just now in the last couple of years, since it wasn't on Spotify until recently, people would like hit me up, like friends of mine going, dude, where's the Boxer record? And I'm going, now you're asking me? I've been trying to tell you guys for 20 years how great that record is. So yeah, I was stoked. I was stoked to hear Dave and catch up, and I just thought it was a great interview.
Thanks, man. Leading back up to that, we go back in time. So you are going to shows, you're starting to find the Midwest, you're like finding your sound. So then how does that lead to you managing Face to Face? Because I'm thinking the way that I'm thinking it is you're going to shows and all of a sudden you manage a band, or is there like a bridge there leading to that?
Yeah, there was definitely a bridge. And I mean, it was kind of both. Yeah, in high school, it was starting to come back. My senior year of high school, that's when kind of like Bad Religion started to reemerge because, they'd put out, I forget exactly what year it was, but they had put out Into the Unknown, which was an experimental, maybe a failed experiment. And Social D put out Prison Bound after a long hiatus. And then, and I think in 89, I want to say, Fugazi came about, and that started to change everything. And then obviously Bad Religion just went on a run of like 3 great records. And like the Southern California scene started to come back just as I was entering when I was going into college. So it was kind of, that was awesome because it was like, okay, we're going to shows again. I mean, this is like the old days, except the difference, which a lot of people like don't really talk about much, is that when punk rock came back to Southern California, it lacked that violent nihilism that the early bands had, which I appreciated. There was an ethical, that's when the DIY and like charitable causes came involved, and like punks like stood for something. That to me was a huge attraction. And so it was right around then that I started to discover the Berkeley scene and really got really interested in what they were doing up there. And then obviously with Spawn Gilman, and then Operation Ivy and Jawbreaker and Green Day and Mr. T Experience and the Queers and J Church and all those bands, I really identified with them musically and socially. That was when the business angle started to take on kind of interest for me. I remember it was my freshman year of college. It just dawned on me like that I was having dinner with my girlfriend at the time, and I was at San Diego State, and I just, out of the blue, I just said, I'm going to start a record label. And she's like, what? You don't know anything about doing that? I go, I know. I have no idea. So I moved back to Los Angeles, and, I had been doing hall shows, and I mean, we grew up in the scene, so that's what we did. But I'm like, I want to put out like 7 inches and like just help bands, because a big influence on me was the film Another State of Mind. It was about Social D and Youth Brigade touring across country, and then they end up at the Discord House. And I saw Ian at the Discord House, and I was just like, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life.
So that movie, seeing him do that, was that one little seed.
Oh, that was huge. That was it. I was literally like, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And yeah, the movie had been out for several years, but it came out when I was younger. I hadn't seen it. Or if I did, it didn't really resonate. But when I saw it at that right age, you're 18, 19 years old, and everybody's talking about being lawyers and accountants and doctors. I saw that movie, and I'm like, that's what I'm doing.
So just real quick, I just want to interject for a second, because your son has been helping us with the whole technical side of this. And is he your only child?
Oh, no, I got 4.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. So, like, do you instill in them kind of that thing of, hey, guys, or whoever, hey, kids, keep an eye out for that thing that's going to just spark you, and you'll know potentially what you want to do?
Oh, wow. It's so weird that you asked that, like, right now, because he starts 9th grade tomorrow. My youngest starts 9th grade tomorrow. I mean, the short answer is yes. It's like I've always told them, it's like, I don't care what you do. Just follow your passion, and then everything else will kind of, like, fall in behind it. But with him in particular, we were having that conversation this morning, because like I said, he's starting high school, and he is talk about like buying into punk rock wholesale. He buys into every part of it in terms of like what it stands for, what it should stand for, its history and everything else.
I love it.
And he's a musician, and he's like, but he's also really socially conscious. I mean, he marches in every march. He makes art and T-shirts that he won't sell because he doesn't believe in the commerce part of it. Like, he's all about it. He's all about it. And so I was telling him, I'm like, look, man, the only thing that matters is that you're passionate about it, and that everything you do around it has to point back towards that passion. So it's like with me, the only thing I wanted to do was this record label. I considered the 4 other jobs and going to college as all part of the same job, which was because I needed to pay for my record label. I needed to pay $600, so I could put out a 7-inch. So I waited tables at 4 restaurants and did all that stuff. But that didn't seem like manual labor to me. That seemed like part of what I was doing to do my record label, because that was my passion. It's funny that that's a great question because I just had that conversation with him.
It just seems like such a perfect scenario because you're talking about that point, and I know what it's like to have that aha moment. I've had it a couple times, and it's just weird because you're just like, holy crap, that 1 second of something changes your history, and you look back, and it's just like wild. So to have kids to be able to do that too, that's so fucking cool.
Yeah, it was so weird, man. It was that proverbial. I'm not even sure I've had that again in my life, except for that proverbial lightning bolt of, wait, this is it's like I saw my future. I was like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and I'll be happy doing it. And it wasn't about like, well, I'm going to build a company and all that kind of stuff. It was like, no, this is what I'm going to do. So yeah, I was very lucky.
So what are the steps you took? You said you moved back to LA, and then I guess it's kind of a two-parter. It's like, how do you start getting into it, and then how are you just feeling the whole time in the beginning?
Yeah, I moved back to LA because I was just floundering around for my freshman year of college. I was just basically surfing and doing nothing down in San Diego. And I wasn't really into the college life, and the fraternity thing is definitely not my scene. So I was surfing and I was going to shows. That was one thing. We had great shows down in San Diego back then. But I just decided, yeah, I'm going to move back to Los Angeles and I'm going to figure it out. And so I moved back. I just made phone calls and cold called bands that I liked or knew of or wrote them or just picked people's brains. And it took me a couple years of like fumbling around. But like the whole time the first thing I came up with was the name, which was weird. And then I was like, okay, then I'll figure out what to put out. So I did that. And then it was just one of those things because when you're going to shows every weekend or you're on tours and you're hauling equipment or you're renting out VFW halls, you just meet like-minded kids and kind of start put things together. So I think that was a natural evolution from that. It was great. And my feeling on it was, this is what I'm going to do. And if I have to wait tables the whole time to do it, great. No worries. Then I got engaged. So that that tended to change the punk rock fantasy.
Was this before you started managing Face to Face?
Yes. Actually, I ended up managing Face to Face because I got engaged. I got engaged. My fiance was like, and we used to have this thing called, there was a book that Maximum Rock and Roll put out called Book Your Own Fucking Life.
Yeah, everyone talks about that.
Right. So it was like, it was the Bible for touring, for DIY touring. And I had my apartment listed in there as a crash pad. So I would have all kinds of, from every country, everywhere, all the kinds of, you can imagine people that stop by and sleep on my floor. And so when I graduated from college, now I was pretty much sure what I was doing because I worked at the radio station. I worked at KXLU, which is it's a real influential college radio station, and I worked at KCRW. So I knew that that's like what I wanted to do. I graduated from college, and then and I was, like I said, I was waiting tables and doing my thing. And then my fiance was like, yeah, this whole like waking up to 12 people lying on the floor is not going to work. So I was like, all right, I got to get a job. I called the one guy that I knew in the music business who I'd known since we were 10 years old. And I was like, and he was an assistant to somebody. Now he's a very, very, very major player in the music business. But at the time, he was just like a glorified intern. I was like, hey, dude, if you hear of anything, I need a real job. He called me like a week later and he goes, hey, there's a management company. They have these huge acts, these huge like country and pop acts, but they just signed a band on Sub Pop to manage, and they need a kid who knows that world to be their day to day to look after them. Do you want to take an interview? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what do I know about management? but I didn't care. He could have said anything. I'm like, yeah, I'll take the interview. Somehow I got the job. Yeah, they hired me to be the associate manager, and I was managing this band Pond on Sub Pop. And then at the time, like maybe a month or two after I started working there, Face to Face came up for management. I ended up signing them, and then they started to kind of really grow in the scene. And then
which album were they on at that point?
We were just about to put out Big Choice.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
So K-Rock got on. K-Rock had just started playing Disconnected, and they had a manager, kind of like an inexperienced manager, and so there was a lot of people swarming around them. They got rid of their manager, And so they were taking management meetings with big management companies. Mine, the one I worked for, was a big management company, but I certainly wasn't a big manager. I wasn't even a manager. But they're like, hey, Rich likes them. Let's take a meeting with these guys. And I had put out a 7-inch from them, the year before. Yeah, we hit it off, ended up signing them, and then I worked as their manager. I worked as their day-to-day manager at that management company for 2 years, and just basically learned how to be a manager. And at the same time, because of my association with Face to Face, Vagrant was starting to grow because we put out their live record. And then when we did Before You Were Punk, because Face to Face was on it, then we also were able to sign up like Blink-182 and NoFX and Lagway and like all those bands to be on our comps. That really, really helped grow Vagrant at the same time that I was working in this management company. So we were like stuffing envelopes at night. And then I was learning how to be a manager during the daytime. And then so after a couple of years, Vagrant was growing enough and the band was big enough where I could, make my own living on them. And I decided to start my own, to leave that management company and start Hard Eight and Vagrant in the same room. And yeah, managed, 30 years later, still working. I'm still managing them. So that was, that was how that all became.
The end.
Yeah. And that's that.
Thank you for the 30-minute interview.
But yeah, I can't overstate enough. Like Face to Face is the beginning, middle, and end of the reason that I can put a roof over my kids' heads. Like when you really trace it all back.
Which is so funny about your youngest saying he doesn't believe in commerce. And it's like, it kind of helped this whole punk rock scene selling it helped us, do some stuff.
We get into that argument a lot. I'm like, these shirts are amazing. You should sell them. And he's like, I'm not selling these. I'm like, because like I'll give them away. I'm like, yeah, but I'm the one who paid for the blanks.
It's got to come from somewhere, man.
Yeah, totally.
So actually, real quick, I saw Face to Face. I saw them a bunch of times, and they've always been one of my favorite live bands. I don't know what it is that they just control the room, and everyone is just so fucking excited to see them. And the first time I saw them was at Tramps. It was with...
hold on. I was at that show. It was either with Guttermouth and the Grabbers or with MXPX?
No, the Guttermouth one, my buddy Chris, he is the one who really got me to punk rock. He was at the Guttermouth show, but they had to leave after Guttermouth and someone else because he had to get home because he was late. So they missed Face to Face they saw a couple songs. So we went back, but it was the Weston Figs Smoking Popes show. Oh,
that was CMJ. That was during CMJ.
Was that really?
Yep. I remember that show. Yeah, because they gave us the night and we didn't really have bands from our scene to put the bill on because it was CMJ. You know how it was always a mishmash. So they let us choose who, and Trevor loved the Figs, and we all loved the Popes. Actually, I just talked to Josh from the Popes this morning.
That's random.
And that was, I was at that show too. That was during CMJ.
That was the first real punk rock, I think that is the first real punk rock show that I ever saw was that show.
Awesome.
Yeah, like I remember I left there and I was just like, I was just like wide-eyed, like I can't believe I just fucking witnessed that. That was the greatest thing I ever saw. The only thing that bummed me out was that was right when they kicked him out or he left the band and then Scott came in and all he wanted to do was see Matt Riddle play because I was playing bass at the time and he was one of my biggest influences because I learned to play bass by playing face-to-face songs.
Oh, is that right?
And playing with my fingers too, which is so fucking difficult. But yeah, I was like, yeah, even though Scott's like,
yes, oh my god, maestro.
Oh my god, he's so insanely good on bass, and he's hilarious too in that documentary they did. I was so blown away of how funny he was.
Oh yeah, Scott's an alien.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like.
Definitely an alien. And we downplayed his alienness in that movie. But yeah, Scott brought a whole new life to the band. But I remember the exact show you're talking about. It was, and how great of a venue was Tramps. It was the best.
It was great, except, and I say this all the time, except those the columns that were there, kind of in
the middle.
Yeah, which was just, I understand that the building needs to stand up, but Jesus Christ, like
they were a little dangerous.
They sucked.
But there was something about that room that the vibe was so great. It was just, I loved it. It was my favorite New York room. I mean, I love New York so much. And in terms of, it's funny too that we're talking about Face to Face there because an interesting thing is that back then when I first started managing them, they had just finished a tour with NoFX of Canada. We were like, okay, look, we kind of got to step out on our own here because we're not on Fat Records anymore. We're getting a lot of shit for going to a major label. blah, blah, blah. But let's step out and like be face to face. Like, let's be our own band, not part of the scene per se. It's a scene we came up with, but they didn't want to be inextricably linked to it. And the thing too was back then, especially, was that the Fat Records and Epitaph bands, usually most of them didn't go past Denver. So they would tour up and down the coast and then to Denver and then come back around, and maybe Chicago. But like, if you were, well, you're probably too young, but it was like, they didn't like No Effects would go out and play CBs, but that was about it. I remember we made this pact. We were like, all right, we're going to go. Oh, and everybody went to Florida because Florida was a great scene for that. But nobody went up the East Coast because it was like, oh, those are hardcore bands. They don't like what we do. We made a mission to play New York and the East Coast more than we played the West Coast. The first show that I ever managed face to face, we did CBs and did like 4 people. I mean, there was nobody there. But by the time we came back, we'd come back a couple of times. By the time we came back and we sold out Tramps on that Guttermouth Grabbers tour, the Sick of It All guys were there, the Madball guys, and they were all like, we love face to face. And so like we really established that as kind of our home away from home, the East Coast. And that's, I think, what separated face to face from kind of what had been done with the Fat and Epitaph world prior to that. And then a lot of people started coming through after that. But that was kind of like, for us, that was kind of like a brave new world. It was like, oh shit, are we going to get our ass kicked here? And it turned out they were like, we've been waiting for all of you bands to come here for years. I'll never forget the backstage at Tramps, Lou from Sick of It All was like, dude, you don't know how long we've been waiting for you guys to come here.
Jesus.
Yeah. So we started, that was a big thing. And then like, I think the next year, like we took out Bouncing Souls and Suicide Machines on tour with us.
I saw that show at Irving Plaza. Yep. Yeah, that was the first time I saw Suicide Machines. I was like, who the fuck is this band?
Oh, remember that?
Yep.
So good. That was right when that first record came out. And that was an amazing tour. But we always kind of went out of our way to go, okay, let's put together packages that isn't the same thing that everybody puts together on the West Coast. Interesting that Tramps would come up, because Tramps was like, even MXPX had never even toured with a secular band when we took them out. They only played in the Christian world. They were scared. They're like, we're going to get our ass kicked, and they went over great. So that was a great thing about Trevor. He was always willing to roll the dice, and we kind of jumped in both feet together. So it was cool. It was really cool.
Face to Face, they were like that gateway band for me to start loving the punk, because I was really into like Tool and Helmet and all those like Pearl Jam and Nirvana and shit. And then my buddy Chris, I was talking about earlier, I think he even got that 7-inch that Face to Face put out. I don't know if you did it. It was one with the it was like a police car. It was black and white.
Oh no, yeah, the Note 40. That was on Fat. Yeah, that was a great 7-inch.
That was like the beginning of him buying that stuff. So I would just listen to music that he had, but Face to Face, I was like, this is one of my favorite bands. So when I saw them, I was just like, Jesus Christ, I can die now. They were so fucking great.
It's so good live. And the thing about Trevor is, like, you could take him and put him into any genre, and his ear for melody and harmonies and just what works is just uncanny.
So that's actually a good segue into this, because Dave's mentioned that in Boxer. He said, he's like, dude, this guy's ear was so good. And he sang some background, I guess, in the first song or the second song or something like that on the CD.
First song, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I forgot that he had produced that. So how did you get him to, like, A, did you already see that he had a good ear back then? And B, was that one of the reasons why you put him in the room with Boxer?
That Trevor had a good ear?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, but because, and by that time too, I'd been managing Face to Face for 3 or 4 years. So like, I mean, I've heard every note Trevor's ever written, and Trevor really produced all of their records. Whether his name was on there as producer or not, he produced all their records. He just has such an unbelievable feel for melody and for what works. And he's also great with artists because he knows how artists think. And when I signed Boxer, I think Dave talks about this, although I think it was actually, it wasn't from an article in Punk Planet. It was almost a classified ad. It said Boxer, maybe it was like a 2-line review. It said it was there was a 4-song demo, and it said, this band is a mix of Lifetime, Game Face, and Face to Face. And I was like, okay, that's pretty high praise. Let's get a listen. They sent us the demo. I didn't hear it at all. I did not hear it at all. I heard them trying to be what I thought at the time, trying to be Lifetime. So the first three songs were I was kind of like, okay, whatever. But then the fourth song was a demo of Georgia, which is an incredible song. It's my favorite song on the Boxer record. And then I was like, okay, wait, hold up. And then John and I just kept listening to Georgia over and over again. And then we called them and we're like, hey, really love this song, the other ones, whatever. And it was either Dave or Will. Jeremy never would have been this bold, but they were like, oh yeah, those first three songs, those are crappy old ones. I'm like, okay, we should probably lead with your good new ones as opposed to the crappy old ones. And then, so I think they ended up sending us a couple more demos that were really good, and we just said, screw it, bring them out. Yeah, I mean, Trevor, I've lost count of how many albums Trevor produced for us at Vagrant. I mean, like a lot. Like he did the No Motive records. He produced a lot of records for us. And Chad Blindman is Trevor's engineer, and Chad did even more records for us than Trevor did. I mean, Chad did everything from the Get Up Kids, Boxer, Rocket from the Crypt. I mean, Chad did like almost everything. He was like the in-house producer or engineer for Vagrant. But yeah, short answer is I knew Trevor would take Dave's songs because they needed some breathing space. They were very great ideas, but they just need a little bit of like separation and a little bit of producing, and it worked out great.
One thing that Dave said was interesting, that they go to sign the contract with you, and Chris Penny says no because he had just signed with, I think it was Relapse at that point, for Dillinger. And so when that happened, what was your viewpoint of that? Did you kind of see the writing was on the wall that, oh shit, this isn't going to go in a good direction?
No. Okay, I don't want to sound like an asshole, but as great as Chris is, and the guy is like a savant in terms of drum. I mean, he's an amazing drummer. I just was like, okay, it's the drummer. You get another drummer. You know what I mean? Like it didn't really faze me. It wasn't as if Dave said, yeah, sorry guys, I'm in another band. I can't sign here. So it was a bummer because Chris was great, but it didn't. I don't remember that being a big sticking point.
I think Chris's drumming later on, once you hear Dillinger and you just hear all that stuff he's doing, like that's so crazy, and you're going, oh my God, this guy's amazing. On the Boxer release, he's pretty straightforward. I don't really feel there's this like standout moment where you're just like, who's that drummer?
Oh yeah, but to me, that's kind of my favorite kind of drumming, when you don't notice it and you just realize, wow, but he's also like spot on. There's nothing flashy, but it's the perfect drumming for that record. But I understand what you're saying totally.
Before this, you had the two comps what was the one that had 100,000 copies sold?
Well, that was the Face Live record.
Okay, so that was that, and then you did the comp that had like 75,000. So you're basically stating there was like these really big wins leading up to you guys getting this. You're like, all right, our first band, let's go. And you sign him. It's like, so he thinks it's like 6 months later they break up?
If that. It might have been 6 months. It felt like 6 seconds later. It was such a bummer. But yeah, we learned the hard way that's the breaks. Because I just, like I said, I to this day I absolutely love that record, and I think it was like 6 months ahead of its time. And it was probably, they probably lasted 6 months after the record broke up. But funny story to that end, when I got an advance copy of Saves the Day of Through Being Cool, and we had Boxer at the time. So I listened to it. I'm like, yeah, this is great, but I can't sign this. We already have Boxer. So,
oh my God.
Yeah. So I was like, just that far away from passing on Saves the Day because we had Boxer. And then, the history tells that we probably made the right decision. But yeah, I literally was like, I've already got the best band, Lifetime influenced young band on earth right now. I have Boxer.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't even put two and two together about that because Dave is talking about how Lifetime was an influence, and everyone knew that Saves the Day just was ripping off Lifetime on their first record.
Yeah, I mean, both of them sounded so very much like Lifetime, and I'm a big Lifetime
I
fan.
love
But
Lifetime.
yeah, me too. I mean, Jersey's Best Dancers. God, the record still holds up.
Better than Hello Bastards. Gonna say it again. It's better than
Oh,
Hello
yeah, no, I'm
Bastards.
with you. I'm totally with you. They're A1 and one and A and A1 for me. It's like they're great, but I totally remember going, oh, why would I sign this band? I have Boxer.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, at least you. So in some stories I've gotten from labels, I just talked to someone recently and they passed on Taking Back Sunday and Brand New, and they never got them. But you later on Saves the Day for one, I think probably their biggest release.
Oh yeah, 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 by far.
So what happens in between the time of Boxer breaking up and that whole, like I said it earlier that I wanted to dip into it, was that I think it was the winter when it just came the news out. It was like, dude, Vagrant just signed four of these bands. Like, what the fuck? It was huge. And but like leading up to that, what's happening with the label before this happens?
Um, 3 words: the Get Up Kids. So once the Get Up Kids came out, it was like a game changer for everything. I mean, honestly, that changed all of our lives.
Like 4 Minute Mile, or when you put out something to write home about?
No, when we put out something to write home about. Well, when we signed them, first of all, because nobody knew who the hell we were as a label, the Get Up Kids were kind of like the toast of the scene at that point, or at least the rookies of the year. The first song I ever heard from them was A Newfound Interest in Massachusetts, and I was like, this is like unbelievable. I was completely, I could not stop listening to that song. And then I heard not that long after, maybe a month, that they were looking for a manager. I got in touch with them and I reached out, and Matt and I hit it off, and they were face-to-face fans, and they were in a situation with Doghouse where they were getting off of an indie and they were going to go to a major, and I had gone through all that with face-to-face. So yeah, we met and they hired me as their manager. Vagrant was in one room and then Heart 8. So now I had face-to-face, and the Get Up Kids were my management clients. I was negotiating a deal for them. They had pretty much already chosen the label they wanted to go to. And so I was negotiating with them for just months, and it was a drag. And they kept backing out on stuff that they promised and so on and so forth. The band had the record written, and they were getting antsy. And so basically, in some conversation, it was floated that, you know what, why don't we just put out the record on Vagrant, and then we'll go to a major after this one. And so then we talked about it. The band and I wrote down everything that they would want in a record label, and then I showed it to my partner. And the only thing is we didn't have a salesperson, like a head of sales. And I was like, dude, I'm not going to sign my client to my own label if I don't have like a top salesperson that can get these records into stores. I just can't do that. But we only had enough money to either sign the band or to hire a salesperson. And I was like, well, there's no use in hiring a salesperson if we don't have product to sell. I mean, yeah, we had the comps and stuff like that, but like for a band, you need like somebody out there pounding the pavement. So we figured it out, kind of famously at this point, but my partner's parents loaned us the money. They took a mortgage out in their house and they loaned us the money. And we ended up hiring the sales guy that we wanted and signing the band. When we did that and that record came out and sold 150,000 copies, it just, the best record to that point was like The Promise Ring, which was 30,000, which was like the high water mark. And so for them to come out and do that, just kind of everyone went, who the fuck is Vagrant Records? And so then
It's true.
So we were too. And so then the phone just started ringing, or the phone started getting picked up when we called bands who maybe a few months before would not have known who we were. We owe all of that to the Get Up Kids.
And what was your partner's name again? I want to make sure.
John Cohen.
So his parents took a mortgage out, or what'd they do? They took a loan out on their mortgage?
Yeah, they took a second mortgage out and loaned us the money from their house.
How did you sell them on that?
I didn't. John did.
Holy shit.
Yeah, John was, we had a little bit of a track record because we were selling the comps and we sold the face-to-face thing. And, we were like at least showing them that it was better than delivering pizzas. John conned him into it. It wasn't like it it wasn't, I mean, it was a lot of, any money back then to us was a lot of money, but it wasn't it wasn't life-changing money, but it was a lot, enough. And so, yeah, so we made them a deal on a loan structure, and well, let's just say they more than got paid back their money and then some over the years. So it was a wise investment for them.
That's crazy. Oh my God. So like, but leading up, and I don't want to go too far backwards to just keep moving forward, but how many releases had you done between Boxer to Get Up Kids?
Just No Motive. So just that's it.
See, that's what I thought. I remember that because the No Motive and Boxer came out, and we're like, okay, like people heard of those bands and stuff, and I was like, okay, Vagrant. And then when the Get Up Kids came out, I was like, how the hell did these guys get this? Like,
yeah, it was kind of out of left field.
So then that leads to, so it was Get Up Kids. That's right, it was Get Up Kids first, and then it was Saves the Day, Alkaline Trio, Dashboard.
I think it was in the, let me think. It was Alkaline. Well, okay. So we were talking to the trio before they put out Maybe All Catch Fire. We were going to put that out. So we were talking to them while the Get Up Kids were making Something to Write Home About, because I was a massive Trio fan. I couldn't understand why nobody knew who they were outside of Chicago. Like nobody, even though they had 2 records out at that point and a third by the time I signed to Vagrant. But, Face to Face, I gave them a Face to Face tour and nobody knew who they were opening Face to Face. It was just because, and to me, they were like the second coming of Jawbreaker. Like that band was so good. I was completely blown away. So we wanted to sign them. And then they said, you know what? We told Mike Park that we're going to give him one more. So we want to honor that. And I was like, yeah, of course. And they said, after we put that out, then we really want to talk to you about coming to Vagrant. And so they did. So I think it went Get Up Kids, but you're right. It was all kind of at the same time, but I think it went Get Up Kids, Alkaline Trio, Dashboard, and Rocket from the Crypt, and Hot Rod Circuit all signed in the same month.
Jesus.
So that was insane.
Wow.
And so then Saves the Day came probably. Saves the Day we'd been negotiating with for a long time. They didn't come out till probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 months after those other ones.
That's right, because didn't you guys put a comp out? It was like a sampler.
Oh yeah, we put out. Those were big for us. Those things were kind of like I don't know. I can't like stress how important those were because we would always debut like what we had coming up for the next 6 months or whatever. So it was the Another Year on the Streets comp. So we would put. Yeah, so it was all those bands, and we try to put unreleased stuff, or at least stuff. Yeah, it was pretty much all unreleased stuff, to preview what was coming, and they were either free or cheap. They were like $5, and yeah, we sold hundreds and hundreds of thousands of those things, and it really got the word out.
I remember listening to it, and this Buried Me. Oh, what's the song? Hold on, I'm gonna open up From Here to Infirmary. The song that Alkaline Trio put on was Bloodied Up and something else. And I remember hearing Bloodied Up, and I was like, oh, I don't like the direction these guys are going in. And then I got From Here to Infirmary, and I was like, this is one of the greatest records I've ever heard in my life.
I mean, from start to finish, it's just so perfect. It's such a great. I mean, like, yeah, man. Honestly. It's one of those things. It's like things were great, at the label and everything. But like when you really think about it, it was the quality of the music. There's no way we could have planned like From Here to Infirmary, The Places You Have Come to Fear the Most by Dashboard, Something to Write Home About by the Get Up Kids, and Stay What You Are by Save the Day. I mean, that's insane. Like, you know what I mean? There's no way.
When you heard the demos for all of these albums, were you just sitting back being like, oh my God, what have I done?
Yes. And I was thinking, what have they done? I'm just like, this is, and they kind of all would, I think the competition thing in a very healthy way, especially in the early days, was amazing because they were all fans of each other. Go, wow, we gotta really bring our A game because look at the records that are coming out before ours. And so everyone just, it was a moment in time. Like they were all at their absolute peak. And not to overlook, Hot Rod Circuit's record was, that record is stunning. Sorry About Tomorrow was so good that I would put it up there in quality wise with those other ones we just mentioned. But yeah, we got very lucky.
Yeah, I mean, like, were you kind of worried for a second because you had mentioned, I mean, it was like Boxer comes out, they break up, and then you have this record that you love, and it doesn't go anywhere. And then later on, who were we talking about that there was a record you put out? We talked about at the very beginning of the interview that it didn't really do much, but it was such a good record. I can't think of who it was, but basically, when we do think of it, or I could just say it in the show notes or something, but you had talked about that thinking, I thought this record, oh, it was Emmanuel. You're like, this record is going to blow up, and it doesn't. Were you kind of nervous with those records being like, I know this is gold, but shit, it could potentially, they could fall on its face. They could fall on their faces.
You know what? At that point, just speaking totally honestly, no, because we had something right home about under our belt. When they turned that record in, I was like, this is, I didn't know it was going to go on to eventually sell a gold record, but it was like, I was like, this is a game changer. This record is brilliant. And once we, because, you know, so much of it is to have leverage in the marketplace to be able to get your records in the stores and to be able to advertise and all that kind of stuff. But really, at the end of the day, it comes down to how good the record is. So now that we had that kind of like that market presence and we had some funds to do it, and those guys turned in those records, and you feel like sometimes you're kind of like if you're a basketball player and the hoop looks huge, like you can't miss.
Yeah.
Like it really felt like that. Like it was like, here's another great record. The artwork's perfect. The touring set up for the next year. There's no way this isn't going to go.
Were you paying attention to the record labels that were around you? Because you guys end up, and I wrote this earlier when you said something about, you said the scene when you started into it was ending, and then later on, basically you guys are like the front lines of this scene, this new part of the scene. Like when you release these records we just talked about, like you're basically like that label that's helping this scene like in its next stage, basically.
Oh, gotcha. Well, yeah, so the scene that I was referring to before was, so kind of went from like SST and Discord, and then it went like Twin Tone, putting out the replacements and stuff. Then punk rock was like dead in California. But then Epitaph and Fat, they owned it, right? But then when that started to kind of wane or whatever, then it was kind of when we started to kind of fill in the gaps there. So yeah, the scene I was talking about coming back was like kind of that early, even though I technically started Vagrant in 91, I didn't know what the hell I was doing until, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. But like it was we owed a lot to like Epitaph, Fat, Merge, those labels that came a few years before us. But in terms of our scene, and the labels that were coming up, not really. No, we didn't pay a lot of attention to, if at all, to labels around us because we were too busy kind of like going, we're just going to play by our own rules and we're just doing shit our own way. And I think it was to our benefit because we always had this thing where we had a couple of sayings. It was like, okay, let's just do what we're going to do with blinders on. Don't be looking left and right. Just stay focused on what we want to do, which is do the best we can for these bands. And then the other thing, like when things were getting like crazy successful, was, guys, we're really not that good. It's just that everyone else is kind of bad. Like it's like, don't get full of yourselves. Like
you're like, we're and I'm saying this, but you're like, we're competing with Drive-Thru right now.
Well, yeah, I don't want to say anything.
I know. I thought I'm going to say that, and you could be like, I will not say anything. But I'm just thinking of the labels that you were surrounded with at that time. Like, I mean, Drive-Thru was pretty huge, but their sound was very, I don't know, cartoony.
Very different than ours.
Yeah, like I couldn't really take a lot of their bands seriously, honestly. So it was very targeted at a certain demographic that would eat that shit up. You guys, everything you're putting out, I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, Stay What You Are. I talked to Brian. I was just like, dude, this record changed my life. I have to say it just because I've said it in so many interviews, and I think people listening to this for a while would be like, you're pussy for not saying this. My favorite Get Up Kids album is 4 Minute Mile.
It's a great record.
And Stay What You Are, when Something to Write Home came out, I was like, I wasn't digging the keyboards.
I get it. I mean, a lot of people felt that way initially, for sure.
Yeah, like my friends, like they went nuts for it, and I was like, yeah, I think I would just, And I had to say it just because, and I'm not saying it's a shit record by any means, but just the fact that I've said interviews where I'm like, yeah, it wasn't my favorite record. I was like, I would be pretty dishonest to myself to not just say that.
Oh, no, you got to. No, I mean, dude, you can't. I mean, how are you going to knock like 4 Minute Mile being your favorite record? It's a great record. It's a totally different sound and approach, and it was also very much of that time. That was also Christie Front Drive, Braid, Mineral. It was very much in that vein. And then they made a decided left-hand turn to go, okay, we're gonna. And I think Deweese brought a lot of that, not just with the keyboards, but with the songwriting and kind of the pop mentality of that. And to something to write home about. But yeah, I mean, shit, I love 4 Minute Mile. I mean, it's the record that made me go sign the band off of Doghouse.
So how does the dynamic change internally in the record label when you guys start popping off?
Well, can you be more specific?
Meaning, like, you start to really have this wild success. I mean, the Get Up Kids are selling, you said 150,000 copies. I'm sure that the other records are doing really well. So you guys are able to fund and kind of take like a little bit I mean, I'm guessing when the money's coming in, you're able to breathe a little bit and say, all right, cool, we're on a roll. But now we have to we have to grow. So that's stressful. We don't want to do that.
Yeah, no, it got insane. I mean, it got insane. And the thing too, it was like, okay, so the Get Up Kids, this is what was the craziest part was, and especially in those first few years, it was like a healthy insane where it was nuts, but it was like, so the Get Up Kids came out and they did, like I said, 150,000 records, but then the trio comes out and they do 175, and then Saves the Day does 300, and then Dashboard comes out and does 1 million. And it's like it was just like, holy crap. It just kept upping the ante in terms of like, we went from literally, we were 3 guys in one room to 18 people in a 20,000 square foot warehouse. Yeah, it was nuts. And then, major labels come calling and blah, 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 and all that cliche stuff that always happens. And it got really, and the scene itself outside of what we were doing was blowing up. And so, but we became kind of like the talking heads for the press angle of it. So I think we got a lot of press around it all happening. And also, like, I think what separated us, and also it helped and it also hurt in terms of like maybe perception with the purists and things, were that I never wanted to be a cool little indie label. I really respect cool little indie labels, but I wanted my bands to be huge. I just wanted them to do it on their own terms. And so like when we put bands on tour buses and we did, and I had in 1 year, the Get Up Kids toured with Weezer, and then Saves the Day toured with Weezer, and Dashboard toured with Weezer, and then they all toured with Green Day, and then they all toured Blink-182. I don't think Dashboard did. It was just more, bigger, and better. And then you end up with Dashboard headlining Madison Square Garden. And it's like, God. I never wanted to be, as much as I worshipped Ian MacKaye, I never wanted to be Discord. I wanted my bands to be huge. I wanted us to be Motown. I think that's where we got a lot of shit. And we just kept kind of doubling down. It's like, no, let's make the record sound better. Let's hire producers. Let's make whatever we needed to do to kind of get the music of our bands that we believed in so much out there. That's what we did.
Whose brainchild was the Vagrant tour? That big one that everyone talks about. It's like Face to Face, Alkaline Trio, Saves the Day, Get Up Kids, and Dashboard. Was that right or no?
Okay, so yeah. So the short answer was it was mine, but the funny thing is, I think I remember Brian in your interview said something like, I like worship those hip hop labels.
Yeah.
That had nothing to do with why I did Vagrant America. No, I was like, Brian, what are you talking about? But no, it was what I wanted. The way I envisioned it was those old Motown, you'd have Smokey Robinson, and then Aretha Franklin would come on next. And then, then the Temptations would do, and then Temptations would, back up Otis. And it was just like this incredible showcase for a movement, right? And like, it was like taking the family out on the road. So it was somewhere between like that and the Buddy Holly Winterfest without the plane crash, that I wanted to push out was those old early 60s tours where, perfect example, like Waylon would play, Buddy Holly would play, and Elvis would play. And it would be like, and so the kids go, I was at that show. That's how it all started. The thing was, like, the way that it timed out was that it coincided with Saves the Day's record coming out, but the Trio and the Get Up Kids and Face to Face were making records. They were between records, so they weren't going to. They already kind of finished their touring cycle. So the tour itself was the only ones who did all the dates were Saves the Day, headlined it, Dashboard was underneath them, and then everybody else switched around. Except when we got to Chicago, we did 4 nights there. So like the Get Up Kids headlined all those nights, but the Trio were on 2 of those nights. So Saves the Day moved down to like, 3rd on that bill, and Dashboard opened that bill. It was things like that. And then the number 1 and 2 slot was switched in and out throughout the tour. It was the Anniversary, it was Hey Mercedes, it was Reggie, it was No Motive. We did 51 dates and then sold them all out. So it was a little insane because it kind of was also like, that kind of was our introduction to like quote unquote mainstream, not what mainstream would become, like, My Chem and Fall Out Boy and all that, but like that's how Rolling Stone ended up doing a big piece on the label, and Newsweek did a big piece, and blah, blah, blah. So that was the Vagrant America tour.
How easy or difficult were the behind the scenes of that tour?
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was so much fun. It was so much fun because you got to remember too, none of those bands had ever been on tour buses. Well, except Face to Face, but Face to Face didn't even do the tour. They only did the LA shows. None of those bands had been on tour buses. None of those bands had ever played in front of that many people. But by the same token, we were going through a lawsuit, and Vagrant was, with our distributor. I was going to shows for 4 days and flying out to New York to, sit in lawyer meeting after lawyer meetings and going to court and then flying back out. So that was super gnarly. That shit aside, it was amazing. It was so much fun that it's like one of those times that you can never even hope to relive. But it was amazing.
Was there like a moment on that tour that was a giant technical thing that you were like freaking out about?
You know what? Shockingly, there wasn't.
That's crazy.
There was one. Okay, technically wise, no, but I do remember one. I gave one of our young employees. We needed a kind of not even a tour manager, but basically we needed a roadie, if you will, to be with one of our bands who remained nameless, but was making an absolute killing on merch. And the only responsibility that this kid that I sent out on tour was to watch this one band and make sure that their merch was watched, that their merch money was watched after. Okay. He left a box of it in the van in New York City in front of Irving Plaza and went off with some girl for the night, unlocked.
Oh, no.
And we're talking about a whole bunch of money. And miraculously, when we came out in the morning, it was still there. But yeah, the kid didn't have a job anymore because it almost took the whole tour down. Aside from that, I don't remember any technical nightmares. I do remember a whole lot of parties that can't be spoken about, though.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like I get the PG-ish version of stories where everyone's like, yeah, it's crazy. Then after I'd say this all the time, after I like finish interviews, people are like, all right, here's the real scoop. And I'm like, holy shit.
Oh, it's insane. Chicago in particular, we took over the House of Blues Hotel and we had 35 hotel rooms and like every floor. So you can just imagine what was going on in that hotel. And honestly, it wasn't even so much our bands. it was just everybody who all the tag-alongs. It was right out of a movie. It was like an Almost Famous kind of thing, you know. Our bands were the biggest nerds of in the hotel, but yeah, there was a lot of craziness. And the funny thing was, or the bummer actually, is we sent a film crew or a 2-man crew out to film the whole tour to get every moment of it, but nobody partied harder than that guy. So all of the video footage was basically either filmed upside down or with no audio or lost.
Oh no.
So we don't really have like what we should have, because there should be a movie about that, but alas, I don't think there ever will be.
I mean, if you have any clips of that, you could put like little Instagram snippets up just of like little scenes from that and be like, oh, this was saves the day, just, you know, doing something funny or something like that.
Yeah. If that turns up, and you know, I'm sure it exists somewhere, but yeah, I don't have any of it. But if it is, I probably will.
At this point, I mean, you hit such pinnacle moments with the label, with selling records, with the bands that you're signing, the live album doing really well, the comp doing well, and then everything like that. Was that like the biggest pinnacle win in the entire existence of you being at the label? And I'm not like ending it where we talk about the label ending, but just kind of like just doing like a quick just jump ahead of, well, we had this other thing happen this other time.
That's an interesting question. It depends on what yardstick we're using, because for me, and I think also for kind of, and I use this term loosely, but like historical importance, I think that was the best time for the label and its most important contribution to the scene. But yeah, it wasn't, I mean, yeah, from 99 to 2003, for me personally, was by far the best time at the label. Those were not the years that we made the most money or that we sold the most records or anything, but it was, to me, when that was the best. Those were the most enjoyable, the most exciting, the best music we were putting out, the best staff that we had, just everything for those years before because everything got ratcheted up after that. And so when we would go to sign new bands, like they would want a shit ton of money, even though they never put out a record before. And like, where's our tour bus? And like, where's this, that, and the other? And it's just like, guys, like, you know, I don't think you got the memo. So it's like, it's not what we do, and that's not how we got here. It did. It changed a lot. It got a lot more expensive. And in a certain way of speaking, there were bands and there was artists that got a certain level of notoriety and fame, and I think that changed them, and it changed kind of their whole approach to either their career or to their label or to each other. Yeah, it's hard to say like the best time was this on paper and we made X amount of money, because it was certainly not our most profitable time, but it was to me our most important time and for sure the most fun time. Yeah,
I mean, because you got to deal with this time, that transition, which I was talking about, like, you know, downloading starts to become a huge thing. And then Matt Breen from Manual's interview, he talks about how their record leaked, which really hurt them. So you're having to deal with that shit where your records are starting to leak too before you guys put them out, right?
Yeah, but yeah, I didn't, you know, okay, so my theory on that was I didn't mind that. Because honestly, it was happening well before that, because we did a Vagrant America tour the year before. We just didn't call it Vagrant America, but we put the Get Up Kids and Anniversary and Koufax went one way, and then Face to Face, Saves the Day, Alkaline Trio, Newfound Glory went the other way. And those were our tour. That was our Vagrant America like blueprint, and it was sponsored by Napster, because, you know, Napster was like the devil of the music industry back then. And so I was like, who better to sponsor us than, because kids were finding out about our music from Napster. And I'm like, okay, they're going to show up at the shows, they're going to buy t-shirts, they're going to talk about it, bands are going to get bigger. Like, what do I care if they're downloading our records? So that never bothered me. Like, I was actually kind of a proponent of it. And yeah, that when I had a problem with records leaking, because every single one of our records leaked before it came out. But the problem was, and this doesn't apply to Emmanuel, I don't necessarily agree with Matt that the leaking of the record hurt it. I just think the record industry was taking a dump at 2005 or 2006 when that record came out, because it was a really good record. I always said, I have no problem with records leaking I have a problem with bad records leaking because when shitty records leak, word travels fast. and when good records leak, it also travels fast. So like every single one of our records leaked. It was just that we were putting out a lot of good records. But then in that era of like 2005, 6, like just basically people were like, we're not buying music anymore. And so that's what I think hurt Emmanuel. And they also didn't totally fit into I know this wasn't an Emmanuel question per se, but Emmanuel didn't really fit into the scene, our scene. They didn't also fit into like what was like that victory music kind of screamy kind of thing either. To me, they were like Nirvana. Like I thought that first record was like, I mean, it was so good.
So good.
It just got lost between the cracks. But I don't think it didn't sell because it leaked. That's for sure.
Well, it's funny. Someone messaged me on Instagram the other day, and they're like, "Yo, I had just heard about Emmanuel because of that interview you did." And he's like, "I've never even listened to this record," and I downloaded it. And he's like, "How did I miss this? This is one of the best records
ever."
And that just happened that happened last week.
Wow, that's awesome.
So that record still fucking holds up.
Oh, it totally does. It totally does.
You said like having them fit into a scene was hard. I saw them play with Circa Survive at some small club in New York City in like 2007, 2008 maybe? When was this? Yeah, something around that time. And like Circa Survive comes out. This is before they were like huge, and I like fell in love with that band. And I was like, couldn't figure out like where Emmanuel would fit into a tour. Like I know they toured with Jimmy Eat World and stuff, but it's like they kind of like the crowds that have been put in front of didn't seem like it was hard. I don't know. It didn't seem like they would match with any bands.
Yep. And they wouldn't, and they didn't. And that's why I was kind of convinced that like we could break them in England first. So I sent them over to England, I think 2 or 3 times before we put them on tour here. Because I was just like, we had a couple bands like that where I was like, I think England's going to get them better than they'll get them over here at first. Like I thought Monine also, another band that made an amazing record for us that just for whatever reason didn't strike the same chord. But like, I think Monine and Emmanuel toured England together with Census Fail. We did kind of a Vagrant UK tour. And, but yeah, they just didn't, they just didn't fit in with, I don't know, with whatever kids were defining as, their scene or whatever.
So what leads up to you, because you left the label after you had sold it. It was BMG who bought it out?
Well, let's see. We sold half of it to Interscope in 2002. And then we bought it back in 2008. We bought it back from Interscope, and then we were independent again. I left the label because my management company had grown a lot. So my management company was taking up most of my time. And so I wasn't really A&Ring the bands anymore. I wasn't signing the bands to Vagrant because I just didn't have the time or the bandwidth anymore. And I was managing, Dashboard, and it was all over the place though. It was like Dashboard, the Wallflowers, Mac Miller. Like it was like my management company was as big as, it was doing what Vagrant did years before and kind of its growth,
Holy shit.
Yeah. So it was getting to be a full-time gig, and there was just no way I could do justice to both companies. So yeah, so I left the label. I still owned half of it, but I left the label. I did a deal with Irving Azoff and joined his company. So I sold part of my company to his, and I moved across town. And so then I actually wasn't in the Vagrant building. So yeah, I think the last band that I signed to the label was the Hold Steady.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was, what a way to go. Love that band. So I think that was 2007. And I split. And then, then John and Dan, they took it in a different direction. And they scored. They got Edward Sharpe, and they got that first 1975 record. So, they did things differently and stuff like that, but they kept it going.
Have you listened to the podcast that they're doing right now with Matt? Like, are you part of that, the Vagrant 25 podcast?
I've listened to, I think, a bunch of them. I was, I wasn't part of producing it, but I think the first episode, they did the first episode basically. It was with just me and Matt talking. Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard it all, but it's cool. It's cool to go down memory lane and listen to a lot of that. It's cool.
Well, because I was listening to the one with John Simmons, Balance and Composure. Do you know? Yeah, and so, but they were signed after you were not on the label, right? Yeah, so because he was like talking about the release, and he's like, yeah, I didn't really go the way I wanted to and stuff, and I'm just kind of like thinking about how when you were a part of it, it seemed like it was. I mean, I'm looking at the roster, the former bands, and I know probably like 90% of that list, and I love those, those records and stuff. And I'm looking at the current bands, and it just seems like, yeah, it goes in a different direction. And then Balance Composure didn't have like the best time on it. Did you? I don't know, from like an outside perspective, when you left, like, were you keeping tabs on it and kind of giving your 2 cents, or were you just like, I'm completely hands off, you guys do your own thing, I'm not gonna make any decisions?
They trying to think how to answer this.
And if I don't want to put you on the spot or anything like that.
No, but listen, I'm never averse to being put on the spot. I just want to make sure that I'm being accurate. Well, when I left, I made it very clear that whatever the label needed me to do, then I would continue to do it, and that I thought we could work both. It would behoove us both because my management company was now pretty substantially sized, and then also tapped into a much bigger machine, and I thought we could have made that work. And those guys didn't have a whole lot of interest in me kind of chiming in at that point. It got pretty frosty there, and for a few years, actually. I mean, I saw what they were putting out. Some of it I really liked. A lot of it I didn't understand why it was coming out. I wasn't stoked on changing of the logo, I can tell you that. I was very vocal about the changing of the logo. Down the line, things being what they were, John and I ended up patching up our differences, and it was actually revolved around when we sold the label to BMG in 2000, whatever that was, 15. But yeah, no, it didn't feel like mine anymore. Like Vagrant, I started Vagrant by myself in my apartment. So once I left it and it was somebody else's, and somebody else was calling the shots creatively, and then it didn't feel like mine anymore. I really didn't feel like I had a place to tell them what to sign and what not to.
What is it now? Because there's a website and you could buy some records on it and some things, but I can't really understand what it is. From what I understand, and this goes towards the like the podcast you mentioned, and they tried to do a couple of Vagrant festival shows this summer. I mean, they did do a couple. It's a catalog label. I think it's just kind of ironic that they tried to hide like their emo past for a long time until it came back, and then now it's all about like celebrating the 25 years of Vagrant, when like for 10 years they tried to hide that we put out all those bands. and pretended that, and said that, yeah, we always put out English noise bands or whatever the heck they were releasing. But yeah, it's a catalog label. I don't think they actually, I know they don't sign anything new. Balance and Composure, interestingly enough, I mean, they would have fit on I liked that band. I had no idea that they were inside Vagrant. I liked them as a fan. I love that band so much.
They were a really good band. They would have fit, they would have fit in the earlier carnation, when I was there.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Yeah. And so it kind of hurt that, they finally signed a band that that I was into, and then it just, they didn't do anything with it.
And that record's so different. It was so good, but it also seems like, he mentions basically their drummer totally fucked them, and they left on bad blood. So I think a lot of things were happening there for them not to be a band.
That happens too.
Before I ask the last two questions, is there a story that you'd love to tell that you haven't told before and now you get your chance to?
No. I mean, I did think about it, but I'm trying to think of one that I haven't told before, or one that would be good enough to match ones that I've told before. I'm
sure that you've told a lot of this stuff like a billion times over and over again. I try to find something where it's like this hidden nugget that isn't going to be repeated, I
mean, this has been awesome today, because I mean, honestly, I say no to most all of these, but the boxer thing was so rad. I was like, for sure, I'm going to do this.
That's awesome.
For one, it's like, I don't like to hear myself speak all that much. And for two, like, I don't want to like tell the same stories,
Yeah.
But yeah, but I will. But I also I'm an open book, so whatever you like would want to ask me, even if you don't end up putting it in there, feel free.
I was going to ask earlier because I was going to be like, what was a pinnacle moment where you were doing the label and you couldn't believe it? And you had said, and like Ray was about to ask that, you're like, oh, then something right home comes about, sells this, Alkaline Trio sells this. So it was like boom, 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 boom. I was like, well, that was pretty pinnacle because I was going to ask you like what your thoughts were when you're watching Saves the Day on Conan O'Brien when they played.
Um, oof. Uh, that they didn't change the tuning of the song before it started because Chris was really flat to start the song.
No, he talked about that in an interview recently.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, they tuned down because he couldn't hit the note, and he said he's like my muscle memory was to the other note. He goes, so when I started, he was like I was flat, and he's like, and then it quick, and then I jumped. So they had 2.5 step down just so he could sing it high. So that's funny that you also caught that.
Well, that Conan O'Brien, that was not a good, yeah, oh, yay. That was not a good memory. Yeah. And you know, it's, you're playing on, now they may have done one before then, but like that was a big deal. Like, you know, you're playing on national TV and you're teenagers and you have to start off the song essentially a cappella.
Yeah.
It's pretty hardcore. It's pretty gnarly. You know, I mean, that's like nerve wracking. But yeah, there were moments. I mean, there were like It's weird because there were pinnacle moments that people would see as pinnacles that I saw as kind of like maybe the end of an era type thing. Like I remember distinctly when Dashboard won the MTV award because nobody thought we were going to win. It was, you know, we were up against all those bands of that day, like the Hives and the Vines and I think even Nora Jones, like just, you know, like nobody even in that auditorium, Radio City even knew who Dashboard was. And we won. And I remember like being super stoked for Chris and super stoked for my little sister. And because she directed the video and like I'll never forget once he walked away from that podium, I was like, well, that's it. We can never go home again type of thing. We're not a punk. We're not, you know what I mean? Like our underground is over. Like now we're part of this machine that I never wanted to be part of.
Oh, I thought you meant it more when you said it's over. It was kind of well, we can't do that again.
No, It was kind of sad. I was kind of like this bittersweet thing for me. It was great. Like I said, I was immensely proud of everybody, but I kind of went like, ooh, you know, we're not the little underdog punk rock label anymore that we've always kind of prided ourselves on being.
Well, it's funny you said that though, because but earlier you said that you didn't want to be like Discord.
Right. I didn't, but I also didn't want to be part of that machine, the MTV. Like I wanted to do it differently. I just didn't want to. It just felt like, okay, people know about us now. We're not. You're right. I mean, it's like a dichotomy, but it's like I never wanted to be a major label. So winning a major label award to me felt like kind of gross. I loved the fact that we were getting big our own way. And I've said this before, but it's like we didn't play by anybody's rules because we didn't know there was any rules because none of us came from the music business. I managed punk rock bands and, you know, you make it up as you go. The label, we were totally doing shit that wasn't being done. So that's what I loved about those years of Vagrant from like 98, I was saying 98 to 2003, 2004. We were doing stuff that indie labels didn't do, whether it was signing bands off of other indie labels instead of going to a major or I mean, I think I may have told this before, but like Kevin Kusatsu, who was such a vital part of our beginnings, he was the first one to ever take out. We used to do Flash, remember the Flash intros to people's websites?
Oh yeah, I used to do. That's how I cut my teeth animating.
And we did use those as TV commercials. So Kevin went to all the punk sites, and when you went onto their site, it would be like a Vagrant commercial. And then it became the norm, but nobody was doing that. Like that was like literally Kevin's idea. And so people gave us a bunch of shit like, oh, what is that? And then of course everyone starts doing it. But just things like that is what I loved the most. Those were like my favorite things, like playing by making shit up and going, yeah, we did that.
So I talked to Lewis from Hopeless, he was talking about how they needed to stand out, so they would do those foil wrapped compilations, and you'd see them, so they would stand out in the stands. He's like, yeah, we'd just be a little bit. We'd try to think of different ways so our comps would stand out above anyone else. Besides the Flash thing, was there like a crazy marketing thing you did, and you're like, oh, this was awesome, or yeah, we did this thing and it totally just fell on its head?
Oh, there's a lot that fell on its head. Let's see. The things that, well, the Vagrant America tour was really kind of the thing. That was we couldn't really top that in terms of just marketing for the label. But I do remember that we had an incredibly talented, he still is an incredibly talented artist. I thought that during our certain era, all of our artwork was really, really good. And a lot of that is attributed to Joby Ford, who was our creative director at the time. But he did like all the pretty much, if with the exception of maybe Something to Write Home About, if you think of the covers, those were all Joby. Like when we had the Alkaline Trio, they just wanted to put a picture on the front. And Joby goes, "What if I whited out the eyes?" Then that became like iconic, right? So it's like that. He did the Dashboard cover. He did the Saves the Day covers. Like all those art. He did Hot Rod Circuit. Like all that era for about 2.5 years was all Joby. But I think what we did that was different, that I always loved, that was a throwback that other people weren't doing at the time was, I don't even know if they do it anymore because I don't see it. It's certainly not national. But do you remember when they had Snipe posters?
Snipe posters.
Yeah, so basically on the side of like construction sites, there's those huge movie posters, right? And there's 10 of them in a row. It's all the same posters. We used to call them wheat pasting back when I was a little kid, like when Black Flag was doing shows, where they glue posters to the like construction sites.
Oh yeah. Oh, I still see kids doing that.
Right. But but like movies would do them. Like the Batman logo would just be the Batman logo. So we started doing that. That was like a big deal, because nobody was, especially indie labels, were not sniping and doing stuff like that. So it just kind of, the impression was like, it made the band look bigger before you ever heard a note. I remember taking the Alkaline Trio, just that picture, nothing else except the release date underneath it, and didn't say Alkaline Trio. And those were the posters that we did all over Chicago. And just things like that were so much fun to do. And we took a lot of crap for it, and I thought it was hilarious. But doing those things that it's just like, oh, punk rock labels don't do that. I'm like, okay, we do.
Yeah, like perfect. I'm gonna go completely opposite of that.
Yeah, and that's usually what works for us. Whenever we tried to play like what you're supposed to do, we usually tripped. Whether it was like, well, you got to use this producer. Okay, that was a tank, or whatever it was. That was definitely one of the things. But there was a bunch of those kind of early marketing things. A lot of the stuff was just born out of necessity because we didn't have any money. I remember the Face to Face Live record. We just sent out an email to their mailing list and just said, hey, if you want free stickers, we'll send you as many as you want. All you got to do is take pictures of where you put them up. So we sent out thousands, because we couldn't advertise, right? So we just got a shit ton of stickers made. And so kids were putting them on like police cars and like taking pictures of them all over the place. And that's how we advertised the Face to Face Live record was coming out, because kids just did it for us. There was a lot of that stuff.
That must be so fun to think about too. Just, I mean, we're a record label. We can do as much guerrilla marketing as possible. Like, what's fun?
Totally.
That's so dope.
Back then, they didn't even call it guerrilla marketing. It was like, we don't have any money. How can we get the word out? And then it's like, what are they going to do? Sue us? We don't have any money. You know?
We'll give you more punk rock points if that happens.
Yeah, totally. Like they're not getting anything out of us, so we might as well swing for the fences. There was a lot of those things in the early days. I wish I could come up with a great story that, I don't know, man. You know what people never ask me about it is the records themselves. Just the making of whatever record, right? Because to me, a lot of it is so much tied into, like when I listen to our stuff, and I still do, I still listen to the Vagrant stuff, I go immediately back to where I was, where the studio was, how the band, like the whole thing comes back to me. A lot of our records I can't listen to objectively because there was a lot that was tied up in it.
Like, what do you mean tied up?
Well, a lot of like just personal stuff tied up in terms of like, oh wow, I remember how hard it was to get whoever, the drummer to to get sober during this, or I remember what was going on internally with the band here, or I remember like thinking, wow, this record is not up to snuff. How are we going to deal with this? Like things like that. Those are the harder memories.
Were you right on some of those when you were like, this isn't really going to hold up? And were you wrong sometimes where you thought that and it was like, no, this actually was positive?
I had a pretty good track record of predicting what was going to happen.
Damn.
Yeah, I mean, because because you live with it. You get so well. I was there for when the songs were written, through when they were demoed, through the re-demoed. You see how they change. You see just all whatever, and then you're like, oh, and you don't go, wow, this is going to screw this band. It's just like, okay, how are we can we change people's mind or make people look at this a different way? Like records in my career that have Ignorance is Bliss, On a Wire with Get Up Kids, In Reverie by Saves the Day. There's those records where it's just like, okay, I know what's coming. I hope that people push through and go, but I know how beloved those bands were, and to change a formula, and not that any of those three bands were formulaic, because if you think about it, each one of those records was really good in its own right, but it didn't sound like a carbon copy of the one before, ever, either of those three bands. But yeah, I remember going, this is going to be difficult. And I think in hindsight, I don't know, I wouldn't change a damn thing about how we made records, but we did not interfere. I was loath to even show up at the studio when the bands were recording. I didn't like to do that because they were the artists.
Pressure that you'd put on them.
Well, it's not, like, who cares what I think? You make your record, and afterwards, what I think of it as your manager or your A&R or whatever you want to call it. And I'll tell you where I think might be problems, but I'm not going to sit there in the studio and like get in the way of an artist's creative process. That's just not, that's not my job.
It's funny you brought up In Reverie. I love that record. When it came out, I absolutely loved it, but I knew it was different. Ignorance is Bliss. I didn't even give it a spin until, man, I think a decade later, and I loved it. On a Wire, I just couldn't really buy into any of the Get Up Kid stuff as they moved on. They just kept changing so much and getting slower, and I was like, well, it's cool. I'm like, it's just not my jam. But the Ignorance is Bliss thing, I can imagine, and I won't keep you on too much longer, but the Ignorance is Bliss thing is interesting because you're managing them, and they talk about, I mean, I think it was that Face-to-Face documentary that they talk about how that record just...
Oh, the second one?
They play the live show at the end, and it's that, and then Chad comes out and plays, but...
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they did talk about it, and he's like, and Chad's like, yeah, dude. He's like, people are like spitting on me, like when we're playing shows.
Oh, no, it was bad. It was really bad. And we canceled the tour in the middle of the tour because it was so, I mean, the reaction was, it was, oh boy, it was bad. That tour was, it was Face-to-Face, Jimmy Eat World, and No Motive. And we only made it like 13 shows into that tour before the band just cracked. I mean, well, specifically Chad cracked. He jumped off the stage in Colorado and just started beating the crap out of somebody who was spitting on him all night.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I got in a fight in Washington, D.C. It was, oh boy, they violently hated that record. Yeah, and then we had to come home. I think Trevor talks about it in that movie. It's like we came home to lick our wounds, and I called him and I was like, dude, you got to make a punk rock record again. I know you don't want to hear this. You're my best friend. I would never lie to you. You got to make a punk rock record again. But that was rough. I can't listen to Ignorance.
Really? I can understand that, but I mean, I didn't obviously go through what you went through, but it's a really good record.
Oh, I intellectually or whatever, I know it's a good objectively, I know it's a good record. Like, there's some of the best songs he's ever written on there, but it's just too close. I mean, it was so painful to like the whole of that,
Oh, I can imagine.
And, yeah, that was rough. And then I think On a Wire was rough for different reasons. Yeah, it was a totally, the band had gotten, the label had gotten really big in their absence. Like the Get Up Kids, like, got us big. Like, there's no doubt about that. But then the label had gotten huge. So we'd gotten really big, right? So then they weren't the big fish. And Matt, I think, talks about this even. And I know Robbie and I have talked about it, but it was like they were kind of pissed off that the label that they gave the chance to, which I'm forever grateful, was now this thing. And so they were like, kind of like, we're going to do whatever the fuck we want. We're going to make the most expensive record we can and they weren't getting along. It wasn't a great environment to make a record in. Yeah. And then, within Reverie, I just think that has a lot to do with drugs, honestly.
I didn't realize how much drug influence was hitting them when they started touring. When Brian talks about it, I was like, I didn't realize psychedelics. And then Chris talks about it with Matt on the Vagrant podcast.
Oh, does he?
Oh, yeah, it's a great interview. I mean, I think that one you'd enjoy because they talk about how they got so much shit for In Reverie and for On a Wire. And Chris just goes off. He's like, fuck them, fuck people. And I'm like, I could dig this. Like, he's just mad. But then he talks about psychedelics and all this stuff. And I was like, man, I heard they had smoked a lot of weed doing that record, but I didn't realize they were going totally like in the psychedelic route.
I didn't either. But then again, you got to remember, like, I was like dad, you know what I mean? Like, these are all kids. They're all in their early 20s. And, I was in my mid 30s or whatever. And they weren't going to tell me. I thought it was weed too. I didn't come to find until much later that there was a lot of acid being taken. And the whole situation around the making of that record and then the DreamWorks thing, it's another one that I can't listen to. It's just too much non-musical things involved with me for actually to be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, if there's an emotional attachment in some way outside of it where you get burned or it's negative, you're going to just think of that the whole time.
And, and there's other records that I don't know that I can listen to, which is like 99% of the records that I've either worked on at Vagrant or managed that I listen to, and it puts me right back into like the greatest place of like the day that record was delivered, And I'm just like super fan because that's really what I am. I mean, Christ, man, I'm the luckiest guy on earth. Like, are you kidding me? I've gotten to do this for 30 years, like hang out with great musicians and listen to my favorite bands. Like I won the lottery.
It is pretty wild, and you're still. I mean, now you're still managing bands with Hard 8. That's been the company forever.
Yeah. It's I'm very, very, very lucky. And things coming full circle. About 4 years ago, I merged Hard 8 with a management company called Working Group, which is owned by Dirk Hemseth, who started Doghouse, who I got the Get Up Kids from.
Oh shit!
So Dirk and I have been partners in our management company for 5 years now. It's interesting how everything comes full circle. Like, people would have thought that Dirk and I were like adversaries, and it wasn't like pleasant buying like the Get Up Kids off of Doghouse, but we always had like this respect for each other, and we never let it get nasty. And we stayed friends forever. And then he moved to Nashville, and then we merged our companies, and now we've got a whole team and 30 clients, and it's great. I'm very, very lucky.
That's so cool, dude. That's fucking awesome. I love that.
Thanks, brother. Thanks.
Well, I think I'm gonna wrap. I was gonna ask you about Amy Madden. She had talked about she worked for you guys for a bit when she did the whole Dashboard thing, but I don't know if that's like.
Yeah. Honestly, you can edit it any way you want, and you can ask me anything you want. Like, I'm an open book. I swear to God.
Well, I mean, like I said, I was gonna ask about the Dashboard thing, but I mean, people know about that whole like Dashboard's going on a drive-through, and then they went on your label, so we don't have to dive into that. She had mentioned she worked for Vagrant, and I thought that was kind of cool because I talked to her about that time, and she talks about Vagrant, and then at some point, it's this weird thing because I talked to Rama, and he talks about the Big Wheelhouse, and then I talked to Jeremy Weiss. So he talks about the house, and I talked about someone. Oh, and then when I talked to Dave from Boxer, he talks about the Big Wheelhouse. So, and then Amy, and then Jeremy's like, yeah, he's like, I remember Amy just came into a lot of money, and she bought this giant fucking house, and we were staying. So I was like, wow, like all of you guys were all like hanging out back then in some, just passing by and stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it was a very, very, very small scene. It was like, I mean, I could name it was Rama. It was Rama Big Wheel. It was Lewis at Hopeless. It was Dirk from Doghouse. It was Vagrant. There was Crank Records, and then there was a little label called Fueled by Ramen. That was basically and Drive Through.
Well, and Fiddler too. Fiddler was kind of poking its head out a little bit.
Yeah, but Amy never really did it as a label per se. It was more of like a fanzine. I mean, not a fanzine. It was more like, how do I put this? Like, Amy was such a supporter of that South Florida scene, and of New Found Glory and of Chris and putting shows on and stuff. And then she'd say, hey, do you want to record? And I'll put this out, but she never had like, then I'm going to get distribution, then I'm going to market it. It was just like, she's a fan of music. She's got good taste in music. And like, made the record. You know what I mean? But like Amy was like the ultimate, yeah, like that 15-year-old kid who hand cuts the fanzine and like that classic prototype that I think every scene needs to this day, even with computers. You know, that was like Amy, like talk about letting like your passion lead. And she's super talented and artistic and she's a photographer and all that stuff. So it worked for sure. But yeah, it was a very, very small scene.
How did she come to work for you guys though? Because that was to the Dashboard release? Because you guys got it?
Yeah, well, let's see. It was, it was for a very, very short period that she came to work for us, but it was very impactful because she's the one that introduced me to Dashboard. So like talk about a burn short, but burn brightly. Kevin had just left. I don't totally remember. Maybe Kevin had suggested, why don't you talk to Fiddler about coming out here? And she had put out Newfound Glory, and I had met the Newfound Glory guys maybe like a year before when they were looking for a record deal. And so I kind of knew, I think I knew her through that. And long story short, she was moving to LA. And so we hired her to do like graphic art and maybe like fill in Kevin's role in terms of, because she had good taste in music. And then she was working for us for a minute, but the New Amsterdams were going on tour. And she kept trying to get me to listen to this demo of her friend Chris. And I was like, I can't sign anything else. Like we have too much already and I don't want to like anything. And so like, I'm not going to listen to it. I just would not listen to it. And she was playing it in her office and I would just be like, not listening to this as I walked by. And then Matt needed an opening act. We needed an acoustic opening act for the New Amsterdam's tour. So then finally I was like, Amy, will you bring in that acoustic thing that you keep trying to play me? And so it was. So she brought in Swiss Army. She told me, she's like, he was just in town last week. He's playing like 10 minutes on the drive-through Newfound Glory tour. And like he sold like 50 CDs or whatever. And so I'm like, okay, cool. So I take it home that night and I was like completely blown away. I called Amy in the middle. I'm like, give me his number. So I call him and he had made it to the East Coast and he was about to play Club Chrome the next night in New Jersey. It was Newfound Glory. The tour was Newfound Glory Midtown, Hot Rod Circuit, and Dashboard was opening. And so Chris and I just clicked and we were on the phone for like 3 hours. And yeah, the plan was, Drive-Thru was literally had put it out that week, had put out Swiss Army that week. And so he's like, but I'm not signing there. I'm still talking to people. And I was like, I'll come out and see you tomorrow night. So I flew to New Jersey that night or that morning and then had dinner with him after the show. And then, I signed him the next day. And then
all hell broke loose.
All hell broke loose. And then all hell broke loose. And then, 5 million records later, and I managed him for 20 some odd years. And he's one of my closest, he's godfather of my kids. And it was a good story. So like I said, Amy didn't work for us long, but boy, for the short time she was there, she sure made an impact by forcing me to listen to Dashboard.
That's a great story. Have you told that one before, I'm guessing?
No, I have not. I have not told that story. So that's all yours.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I just saw Dashboard. They just came into town with Jimmy Eat Worlds a couple months ago. And it was...
Where do you live?
I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay, I was going to say, you must live in a small southern town, because that was a weird, globally routed tour.
Yeah, because no one really comes here, even though this town is awesome. PNC's down the street, and Mike Chem is playing there with Turnstile in like a few weeks, and I just saw Rage Against the Machine there. And then we got the Redhead Amphitheater right behind my apartment building. I saw Rise Against there the other day, and then a couple weeks before that was Gin Blossoms and shit like that. And everyone just skips this town. I'm like, why are you just going to Charlotte? Like, fuck Charlotte, come here.
Isn't there? Well, I might be thinking. Where's the Underground and the Fillmore? Is that in Charlotte?
The Underground.
It's on campus. There's a 1,900 capacity Fillmore.
Yeah, they had just built that a couple. It's like right on the outskirts of whatever. There's like a main highway. I was actually going to go see Circus Survive there within the year, and then Anthony just bailed on it because he was having some issues. And so I was like, oh, I was supposed to see it there, but apparently it's a really nice venue.
Yeah, we were going to do Jawbreaker there, and we ended up actually just taking the night off because one of our crew went down with COVID, so we didn't end up booking that night. But yeah, we were going to. We left North Carolina off of this Jawbreaker routing, so we'll catch up with them. We'll catch up with y'all next time.
Dude, take a look at Raleigh, man. There's some, I don't know, like that Jimmy World show was packed.
Was it?
Oh yeah, it was like I was literally like pushed up against like the back, basically.
That's great.
Yeah, it was so cool. Well, cool, man. So I am gonna wrap this up. This was absolutely fucking awesome. I really am excited.
Oh man, I appreciate you doing it. Anytime I can talk about Boxer,
I love that's what sold it, is that I got to talk to Dave, and you're like, oh, dude.
So rad. Tell Dave I said hello, will you?
I will. I'll message him. 2 questions before I ask the last question. What would you like to plug? It could be about you. It could be about someone else. It could be about both.
Oh boy. Shit. What do I want to plug? You know what? Let me just plug this. If I could, no, because then I'll be preachy. I think we live in a very fucked up world right now. The reason that we all, I think, love punk rock is because it's the great equalizer. And I think that there's a message in art that needs to be kind of refound. I want to plug art. That's what I want to plug. Whether it's music or painting, whatever kind of expression it is, I think we need to find that again. So that's my plug.
Okay. Just not your son's shirts, because he won't sell them to people.
No, the little bastard. It's a real fun having like an anarchist and living down in the South. Yeah, it's as you can only imagine.
I mean, just wait till he's like in his 20s. Probably that's where you start to become a little bit more. I'd like to have some money. It's
well, yeah, cool. I'd like to make a living. Is what he's going to be wanting to say.
Yeah, my parents aren't fitting the bill.
But yeah, no, you know what? I'd like to plug being nice to people. How about that?
Okay. Well, that kind of comes in with the last question. A lot of people say that with this one. So, what scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
Oh man, that's honestly, like, I think I'd like to honestly say all of them. I think they've evolved, obviously, because a lot of them they're actually not even relevant to today's society. But like the basics that I learned from punk rock and are applicable to every single thing I do in my life, and I've tried to teach my kids that. It's like do things ethically and honestly, help other people, but like also like take a stand when you believe in something, and go out on a limb and like stick up for the little guy. And it's like the things that I learned about punk rock more than anything is do it. Like, just friggin' do it. Who cares if you fail? You're gonna figure it out. And it's like I was watching this thing with Henry Rollins where he was like, you know what? Why do I have a book company? Because I wanted to put out my own books. Nobody else is going to do it for me. So I looked up how to do it. And he's like, that's what Discord was. That's what Black Flag did. So it's like what I learned from punk rock was like, just friggin' do it. It's like, do it and do it well. Give it your all and follow your passion. That never changes.